Signature moves. The often overpowered, scarcely distributed special little attacks that Game Freak likes to give to legendary Pokémon, franchise mascots, and a few other Pokémon for some reason or other. They've been around since the very beginning of the game, in some cases just because there weren't that many Pokémon in the beginning and they forgot to give those moves to other Pokémon. And, some others that were more deliberate and innately tied to those Pokémon's characteristics. I have a lot of underlying assumptions about signature moves and the Pokémon that have them, and today I'd like to test a few of them and share some conclusions afterwards. First, what defines a signature move? This might sound like an obvious question, but for statistical reasons it is important to clarify. I will be talking about moves that are only used by a single line of Pokémon. This means that if Pichu and Pikachu are the only Pokémon that get that move, then it is a signature move. Most of this video will be focused on offensive signature moves, moves that deal direct damage. I will talk about non-damage dealing signature moves separately, but generally we are discussing damage dealing moves. A lot of moves have started their lives as signature moves, simply by virtue of one Pokémon getting them, and then being given wider distribution, stripping them of their signature status. My dataset for this video will talk about signature moves that are still signature moves in Generation 9. This means that Twin Needle, which was Beedrill's signature move from Generations 1 to 4, is not a signature move. Moves like Volt Tackle are, because only the Pikachu line gets it, and still only gets it in Generation 9. This categorization actually removes quite a lot of moves from the equation, since the distribution of moves in later generations expanded quite a bit, or at least lots of moves from being learned by one Pokémon to lots of moves being learned by at least two Pokémon. It also removes a significant chunk of signature moves that were deleted in Generations 8 and 9. I will also not talk about Z moves or G-Max moves, since I don't find them super interesting, and to be honest, I've always just found them to be jokes more than anything else. They're funny, and I can't really take the idea of soul-stealing 7-star strike seriously. It just sounds a bit too over the top and ridiculous to me. For posterity, those moves are listed here for those who do enjoy them. Now to test some assumptions. I think in large part due to Pokemon like Ho-Oh and Lugia, I assume that most signature moves are given to legendary Pokemon, or at least the high-powered ones are. I tend to think of Sacred Fire when I think of signature moves, not Payday, even though it is very much a signature move. And generally speaking, this assumption is about right. Of the 161 moves in my dataset, 68 of those belong to legendary Pokemon. For this check, I have grouped moves that are signature moves to thematically linked legendaries. For example, Nature's Madness is learned by Alola's guardian deities, but is only counted once for this purpose. At least 54 mythical and legendary Pokemon have access to a signature move, with some of them having access to multiple, or access to different moves depending on their form, and whether they are fused with a different Pokemon. In general, I think it's fine to give lots of signature moves to legendary or mythical Pokemon. Yes, they already tend to have a massive base stat total and access to good moves anyway, but having a really strong rare Pokemon use a really strong rare move feels good, and that's a good thing for playing Pokemon in my book. Next assumption. As I just said, I tend to assume that signature moves are usually stupidly high power moves. I typically think of a signature move as something like Roar of Time or Psycho Boost, rather than Triple Kick. The power range on signature moves is kind of ridiculous, ranging from 10 base power Triple Kick, which is a multi-hit move with a unique mechanic, so you could generously say that it's 60 power, to 160 power, stronger than the vast majority of moves in the game. Keep in mind, this does exclude now deleted signatures, such as Victini's V-Create, which was just unbelievable at 180 power. All that said, the average power of a signature move is 92. That is really high. When you remove non-legendary moves, it goes all the way up to 98. Let's take a look at it some other ways. I usually think of signature moves as special, in both the pre- and post-split sense. That is, they're special moves after Generation 4, or are specially oriented types pre-Generation 4 split, like Dragon, Psychic, or Fire. And much to my surprise, they are almost perfectly evenly balanced, with about 81 apiece in the special and physical camps. The type distributions for each physical and special are not surprising. Dark, Steel, and Fighting are well represented for physical, but I am still quite surprised at how even the distribution is. Looking at the type distributions, I was a little closer to the mark. Psychic leads the pack with 17 total signature moves, closely followed by 16 for electric types. And a surprise to no one, Bug is in dead last with a single offensive signature move, Attack Order. They couldn't even give Technoblast a bug drive or something to cut it some slack. This data also supports what many in my comment section have complained about, and that's electric type's lack of access to good physical moves that are not signature moves. There are plenty of good physical electric attacks, but they are overwhelmingly signature moves, meaning a very limited pool of electric types can access them. Another assumption I had and wanted to test was how frequently these high power moves are given out. My guess has been that they're becoming more common in the generations, with box mascots in newer games receiving 1 or 2 as a rite of passage, and older box mascots in remakes getting them as well. What I am about to say is caveated by the fact that my data is biased towards an increase. If I consciously exclude moves that were signatures but received wider distributions, then that in itself is going to make later generations appear to have more signature moves. But even being conscious of that, boy have they picked up. The devs started adding a few more signature moves in Generation 4, and then handing them out to every Pokemon with a base stat total above 600 from Generation 7 onwards. I'm fascinated by how much they pick up in Generation 7, since that was the first generation without a complete national dex where every Pokemon to date could be obtained, and yet they still increased nearly threefold on Generation 6. I think the general increase is partially explained by DLC becoming a regular part of Pokémon in Generations 8 and 9. With that DLC has come new Legendary or Paradox Pokémon with signature moves. It's not the only reason, but part of it at least. For Generation 7, the partner Eevee and Pikachu have 13 between them in Let's Go, which inflates that generation's count quite a bit. Flipping the question slightly, I wondered whether signature moves tended to be given to Pokemon that have higher base stat totals, especially for the non-legendary Pokemon. Taking the most evolved form for each line that gets a signature move and excluding legendaries, I found that the Pokemon getting signature moves actually tend to have slightly lower base stat totals than the pool of fully evolved Pokemon generally. Signature move getters have an average of 504 base stat total compared with 515 for non-signature move havers. For what it's worth, legendary signature move havers have an average base stat total of 625, and the entire pool of signature move users have an average of 555. I think the lower stat totals for signature move users is explained partly by the fact that lots of signature moves are tied to gimmick Pokemon, which are unique but not necessarily all that strong. Smeargle is the classic example of this. Its unbeatable utility is nerfed dramatically by the fact that it has some of the worst stats on the planet. Morpeko has a unique ability and a strong signature move to match, but sits near the bottom of the table for base stat total. There's nothing wrong with this, but it is clearly a conscious decision by the developers to try not to make gimmick Pokemon that also have ridiculous stats. Unless, of course, they're legendaries, then fire away, do that as much as you like. I was thinking about what signature moves are for, what purpose do they serve in the games, and I was struggling to think of anything more than they're just pretty cool. Mechanically, they're a bit absurd. They have a significantly higher average power than the regular move pool. They're commonly given to Pokemon with base stat totals exceeding 600, and frequently have some pretty busted secondary effects as well. Further, the signature moves given to legendary Pokemon tend to be significantly stronger than those given to non-legendary Pokemon, by quite a bit. For casual play, getting a legendary Pokemon during the course of the story and spamming a strong signature move afterwards is a surefire way to blast through the rest of the game with ease. In VGC formats where legendaries are allowed, these moves are a no-brainer choice for simply dealing massive damage. If I was trying to balance the game, these would not be something I would include, or at least allow for specific formats. But as a player, they're just a lot of fun. It feels fun and good to be in the Sinnoh Elite Four, send out my Palkia against Cynthia's Garchomp, and use Spatial Rend and crit to one-shot it. It's not at all a tactical or a skillful choice, but it definitely is fun. And importantly, it's fun to kids, the main demographic for these games. I do wonder about their general utility when comparing to the existing moves in the games. It's not like Sacred Fire is really all that different from Fire Blast in most use cases, and Ho-Oh can learn Fire Blast no problem. But you'd never use Fire Blast on Ho-Oh when you have the option of Sacred Fire. Signature moves tend to serve as better versions of existing moves, in some cases only minimally, and in others by a lot. Palkia can learn Dragon Pulse, but who cares when there's Spatial Rend, which is just that little bit better for most applications. I'll talk briefly about status signature moves, those that do not deal direct damage. They are significantly fewer in number, but no less interesting. For this dataset, I decided to include signature moves at all points in time, including if they had been subsequently given to other Pokemon. I did this chiefly because there actually aren't that many of them, and if you took out the ones that received wider distribution, you would be left with very few non-damaging signature moves. This is where a lot of historical gimmick moves have existed, and still exist for some Pokemon. Smeargle is nothing without Sketch, after all. On that note, the moves are almost 1/3 normal type, but that isn't that surprising when you think about the move pool as a whole, which also has a disproportionate number of normal moves. It's also interesting to me that exceedingly few legendary or mythical Pokemon have status signature moves. Theirs tend to be damage dealing and overpowered at that. The non-damaging signatures have also increased in frequency in the last generations, spiking in generations 6 and 8. Some of the distributions here are kind of bizarre, like Milk Drink. It is on and off the signature move of Miltank, and then in Generation 9 specifically becomes the signature move of Go-Goat and Skiddo. Likewise for Tail Glow, the signature move of Volbeat, which then gets shared with Manaphy and Xurkitree of all Pokemon, and then gets simply deleted from the game. Kind of an odd path, but no matter. And that's all I had, folks. Tell me, do you like signature moves? Do you think there's too many now, or does the balance feel right? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, it helps the channel out a bunch. Give me a follow on Twitch if you want to chat between videos and see some speedruns. Thanks for watching.